There's a lot of questions that we have in life. There's a lot of times when you face something at a crossroad and you didn't know whether to go left or right. One of the things that you could utilize to draw on was the experiences from other people, stories you've heard about people in their past. Draw on the knowledge of what other people know. This helps you to precipitate possibility so that you can engineer the outcome as favorable for you as possible. That is what experience teaches us. That's how we expand our realm of understanding. Because to grow is to know, and the more you know, the better it is for everyone involved. And right now, you are probably sitting at a place. You're probably sitting at a crossroad. You're probably asking yourself, should I do this or shouldn't I? Because that's why you're here. And that crossroad could be colored with all kinds of decisions and choices. Let's just look at the art of decision making first before we talk about what my story is, so that you could glean some type of understanding of it. You make 1,000 decisions in a day or more that are subconscious, like driving your car. You don't really keep in track about how many times you press the brake or the gas. The little nuances it takes to stay in the center of the lines. But you did when you were 16 or 17 learning how to drive. That was extremely important to you at that opportunity. That was something that you had to utilize 100%. Your senses were kicked in and on so that you could hold space effectively. But then somewhere down the line, it became a systematic thing, and you didn't keep or log it. You gave it over to your subconscious, and it just took it. And you went on making your conscious decisions. Well, right now is a conscious decision. A conscious decision to understand the nature of change and how it comes for you. And that's what my story is about, the nature of change. How change will either be a nudge you now or come as a chaotic calamity that will shift your entire life. I choose to allow change every day. I do something different. I nudge myself into the now. And that's a lot of the way that I do readings. That's a lot of the way that I use intuitive insight, the things that I've gained from being on the other side. That's why I go to the Akashic Records, so that I can learn how to lead. And most importantly, learn how to be a leader. And to learn how to let go. Because sometimes doing nothing is doing something, and sometimes doing nothing is necessary. However, most of the time, momentum and movement is what's going to help you move out of a situation that you're experiencing. So now, a moment in my life that made a huge impact, and which has brought me to the place where I'm actually here helping you. I grew up pretty much according to paper. White picket fence. Everything was protocol. I had a mom and dad. They didn't divorce. I went to school. I was the only child. I set out at 18 to become a youth pastor, so I went to seminary school. Now I had my runs of being a little bit of a troublemaker, but for the most part I was upstanding and good. So, moving on into age 21. October 16th, Friday. There was an opportunity for me to go out and to spend some time with a friend of mine that asked me to run an errand with him. We had to leave around 10 p.m. that night. It was starting to drizzle. Everything was looking pretty dreary. My gut was saying, don't go. I was feeling disconnected. I wasn't feeling plugged in. You've been there, I'm sure. That moment when you shouldn't have done it and you did anyway. Well, this is to redefine what you did. Because sometimes what you did and you think you shouldn't have done actually brought you here. And here is where you're supposed to be right now listening to me. Everything that has happened in your life has led you here. And it hasn't been a series of coincidences. It's been a series of choices. It is calculated. It is consciousness. It is the effort of creation to help you to be right now. So we went out. I told my mom I shouldn't go. It was about 10:59. We were getting ready to leave. I'm going to go back. It's all good. We're headed to the car. It's a little bit more rainy now, and I hear her scream. So now this is the point when you make the decision, should I look into this or not? Well, I led with my face, and of course, that didn't go well. It was a domestic situation in which I became assaulted. To the level of the next morning I was in a hospital, centered in a CAT scan tube, looking at the faces of my father and my mother and a reflection of a fractured face in the screen. My life was forever to change. I was going to lose my eye, my hearing, my face. I would never look the same. My hopes had been being a model for Levi's shattered in one split second. You see how life turned you? How could I ever get up in a pulpit and preach to people? Because my face was going to look like the Phantom of the Opera. Hyperdramatic. Yes, I know. But now, I'm looking at my parents. A decision has to be made. I have to go into 12 and a half hours of surgery. And this isn't an easy surgery. Fate had smiled upon me because the doctor that had been on call was the exact masculovascular plastic reconstructive surgeon. I say that without messing up. Only one person needed to do the job of 4 people because it had to happen now. And I was terrified. I couldn't swallow. I couldn't think. Everything about this felt wrong. Something inside of me was saying goodbye. You see, I didn't do well under anesthetic, but nobody mentioned that. We forgot to include that. I was hypersensitive due to low blood pressure. So surgery, I remember seeing a young African-American lady there that didn't exist because I looked for her afterwards. She was comforting me in pre-operation. Then I was wheeled in and stretched out like I was being put on a cross. The irony. And I remember these huge stainless steel lights above my head, and then suddenly I drifted off. And then, just like when you're flying in a dream, and you feel that falling sensation, and it jerks you out of your sleep, and you look around to see if you're okay, it hit me. It felt like someone jumped on my chest. I immediately sat up on the table, and I'm looking around, and I can hear my heart beating, but no one seems to realize that I'm up and awake. Everyone's rushing around. Everyone's in a hurry. And I felt cold. I felt alone. I felt scared. And I just remember saying, please, please, let this just be a dream. And then I laid back and I closed my eyes, and it felt like someone threw the coldest ice water on me that I'd ever felt before. And I sat up again, and as soon as I went to sit up, it was like being electrocuted with thousands of volts of electricity. I could feel it through my toes, through my spine, in my ears. Everything was ringing, almost like a gunshot in a room. And I remember I was trying to talk over the ringing. I was yelling. I was like, what's going on? Help me, please, help me. And everyone continued about their way, and they didn't even look at me. And then I remember jumping up on the table and yelling at everyone, and no one would look at me. And then I got this sick feeling in the pit of my stomach that pulled my head down. I turned behind me, and I just saw me on the table, laying there. I had never felt more alone at that moment than I've ever felt in my entire life. Everything I had thought, everything I had read, everything that I had gone to school for and prepared for didn't bring me here. And I just remember thinking to myself, I'm only 21, this cannot be. And then at that very moment, it felt like an earthquake, and the ceiling erupted, and it opened to this most beautiful blue sky I'd ever seen in my life. And as I looked up, it looked like electrified raindrops falling onto my face. And I just felt the water drip over my face, down my body, and I put my hands on my chest, my shoulders, and I just closed my eyes, and I said, please, please, just tell me this isn't really happening. And as I reached to grasp air, I realized I didn't even need to breathe. And I looked down at my feet, and they were standing on solid ground. There was grass under my feet. There was no more table, there was no more room, there was nobody else. And I looked around, and I saw trees, and I saw symbols on these trees. I saw a symbol in the dirt. I didn't even have to ask what it was, I already knew. So I'd look at a rock, and there'd be a symbol carved in it, and I'd be right in front of it before I could even think about it. Now these symbols, yes, I did bring them back, and yes, I did tattoo them on my body. I believe that they made me a conduit the way that I did it. An open vessel of clay that carries information from the other side to here. Intuition. And I started walking. I heard this beautiful hum in the distance, almost like a flute. And I walked towards it up this hill. And then I could see over the next hill, the sun was beginning to set. It was the most beautiful sun I'd ever seen. It was purple. It glowed purple. The dirt was almost like this violet-colored sand with the most beautiful, brilliant green grass. But don't mistake that I still felt alone. There was no one. There was not a soul. But there was no fear. Only the recognition that nothing else was there. And I walked towards the sun. And then I stood. I got to the crest of this hill, and I looked down, and on the beach there was this little 12-year-old kid standing next to this man with a beard, and he motioned to me to come down. So I walked down to the beach, sat down beside him, and we proceeded to have the longest conversation. I was like, how long does the sun take to set? I feel like we've been sitting here for years. We'd sat there so long. He went from being a young boy to an older man. And then I asked him, what happens next? And he said, well, you'll be back, don't worry. He said, but let me just tell you something. You see, that sun setting like your life. As that sun gets closer to the horizon and disappears, so do you. But it will rise tomorrow, don't you worry. Because it's a revolution, it's a cycle. You'll come back round. And then he said, however, when you sit with your soul, imagine you're sitting on the sun, and it never sets. So everything is perception and perspective. So once you understand this, you understand the nature of everything, and now your life will unfold the way that you deem it. Those decisions suddenly are not as weighty as they once were. Survival isn't survival after all. It's living a life of expansion, of understanding, of expanding who you are, what you are, where you are. And he says, time for me to go. And I said, but go where? He said, well, I've got to go back to Earth. And so do you. I was like, go back to Earth? Where are we right now? He goes, where we are right now is where everyone is. Where no one worries, because we're already here. And that was quite confusing. I had no idea what the guy was saying. But I trusted every word that he said, and I believed it to be true. And he forecast things that would happen along the way. He said that I would be able to go into the Akashic Record Hall and to experience the submersive nature of knowledge as symbiotic. And then suddenly it felt as if fingers went into the back of my spine and grabbed around it and began to pull me backwards. And as I was being pulled rapidly, it was almost like I was being pulled into this matrix of a black hole, because then suddenly I began to see these mutated, side-swiped slivers of life, of lives that I've lived, of people that I would meet, of things I would do. And I began to understand the nature of everything that's connected. Everything happening simultaneously as now. And then I slammed back into my body. With information that I couldn't explain, to make decisions I had no idea, to the undercurrent of a new style of creation I was not prepared for. And this put me onto a path of recovery for about 2 years, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. And just when you think the worst can happen, and that something that happened was horrible, you begin to see that the exact thing that happened that you believed was to turn your life upside down, was to turn you right side up. You see, because about 8 months later, my father passed away. And through the course of that 8-month recovery session, I got to stay with him, sit with him, experience the true nature of father and son. And that was like nothing I had seen prior, because we were disconnected. So that healing from my face also healed my heart, healed my soul, and allowed him to heal so he could go forward. So when something happens, sometimes it's to separate you on the path of where you were going to where you need to go. Just because something bad slams into you, it doesn't mean that it wasn't supposed to steer you back on track. So understand, every experience is beautiful in its own element. Now, confirmation is how I like to operate, and this story goes far beyond, because I experienced another near-death about age 32, drowning in a river. But I went to the small town outside of where I live, and I sat down in this esoteric theosophy library, and I looked up on the wall, and I got that same spider sense tingling, and I saw a picture of the little boy that turned into the man. That man that I had sat with for that piece of time was real. And everything he taught in his life here was what he had told me on the other side. So my story is a story of perseverance, of putting yourself in the exact place you are right now, and understanding that no matter where or what has happened to you, it is on purpose. And pause, collect yourself, be present, and let's make a decision that will help you recalculate everything, to put you back into the creator seat, the control seat, that will give you the essence of understanding that everything has happened to bring you here. I hope that you enjoy this story. And if you have any more questions, please always ask.